Good evening, everybody. As principal, it's my great pleasure to introduce this inaugural lecture, the Oresteia, This Restless House, Reframing an Ancient Tragedy for a Contemporary Audience by Professor Zinnie Harris. Zinnie Harris is a critically acclaimed playwright, screenwriter, and theatre director. Here at St Andrews, she is Professor of Playwriting and Screenwriting in the School of English. We're fortunate indeed to draw on the skills of a person who not only brings extensive experience of the stage and screen to the university, but combines this with an intellectual imagination, rigor, and generosity that allows us to appreciate the continued significance of theatre and story in our culture. Professor Harris was born in England and brought up in Scotland. Her full name is Zorinthia, which is the Latin name for a genus of very beautiful butterflies, which occur mainly in Greece. Zinnie's father is an entomologist. An interest in theatre showed early in her life. In an interview she gave a few years ago, she related that I had a whole working set of puppets as a child, and I would save up for each new one. I had an old man, a girl, and a boy. And then I got a nurse, and that changed the plot. I remember saving for a year for a skeleton puppet. I very much like the matter-of-fact way in which that is said. The family relocated to Scotland when Zinnie was 8, when her father was employed at the Royal Scottish Museum, as it was then. She went on to study zoology at the University of Oxford. This is not, of course, an especially standard career route into drama, but Zinnie has said about this aspect of her life that that kind of training stands you in good stead for writing. I think the ability and the desire to examine things in absolute tiny detail are necessary for both disciplines. And that something significant had happened to her potential creativity while Zinnie was at Oxford is indicated by the fact that her zoology degree was rapidly followed by an MA in theatre direction at the University of Hull. Zinnie showed an early vocation for drama in communities, an approach she still champions. And in the late 1990s, she became writer-in-residence at the Edinburgh AIDS Hospice, Milestone House. She went on to work with the theatre company Clean Break as writer-in-residence at Ascombe Grange Open Prison for Women in North Yorkshire. By Many Wounds, which opened at the Hampstead Theatre in 1999, represented Zinnie Harris's professional breakthrough and was shortlisted for the Allied to Mech Playwriting Award and the Mayor Whitworth Award. Further Than the Furthest Thing, first performed at the Royal National Theatre in 2000, won the Peggy Ramsey Playwriting Award and the John Whiting Award, as well as being specially commended by the Susan Smith Blackburn Award and leading to Zinnie being shortlisted for the Evening Standard Most Promising Playwright. Between 1999 and 2001, Zinnie was playwright in residence at the Royal Shakespeare Company. Nightingale and Chase in 2001 was followed by Midwinter, Solstice, Fall, and The Garden, each cementing Zinnie's reputation as a writer of exceptional perceptive ability. Her skill is to explore those switches in human behavior, the strong emotions that make us human, often against suddenly disruptive backdrops, and her work has received sustained acclamation over the past 2 decades. The Wheel, performed in the National Theatre of Scotland in 2011, was joint winner of the 2011 Amnesty International Freedom of Expression Award and a Fringe First Award, and was followed by The Message and On the Watch in 2012. A theme of Zinnie's work has been writing new plays centred on the experiences of women, notably her 2015 morality play, How to Hold Your Breath, which won the influential Berwyn Lee Award. But Zinnie has also shown an exceptional talent for reconceiving women characters in historical dramas. In 2009, she adapted Ibsen's A Doll's House, and this confident, challenging reframing of the female experience leads us to the play Zinnie will lecture on this evening. First performed in 2016, This Restless House brings a modern understanding and psychology to Aeschylus's original trilogy and the life of Clytemnestra. Zinnie was commissioned to adapt the Oresteia trilogy by the National Theatre of Scotland. It was first performed in Glasgow and subsequently at the Edinburgh International Festival in 2017. This Restless House was named winner of the Best New Play at the Critics' Awards for Theatre in Scotland 2016. Zinnie has always directed both her own work and that of others, and in 2017, the Critics' Awards, the Theatre in Scotland Prize for Best Director, went to Zinnie for her production of Carol Churchill's futuristic drama about cloning, A Number. She's brought her talent for direction to the Byre Theatre here in St Andrews as artistic associate, as well as her teaching at the school. Zinnie also writes for the screen, and her work includes 2 90-minute dramas for Channel 4, episodes for the BBC One drama Spooks, and most recently Multiples, a short television play produced as part of the Snatchers, Moments from Women's Lives season on BBC 4 this summer. Some of us had the great pleasure of hearing Zinnie read from this to us before our awards dinner last academic year. Professor Harris joined St Andrews in 2011 as a senior lecturer in the School of English. As senior partner in a brilliant team that also includes Oliver Emanuel and Sam Haddow, Zinnie has had a transformative effect on the teaching of drama in the school. Together, Zinnie and her colleagues have changed the dramatic pedagogy at undergraduate and postgraduate levels to a vital dialogue between the academic and the creative. Zinnie's work has also facilitated the school's deliberate move towards a more diverse critical approach to English and world literatures. The school also reports an exponential improvement of the professional training of postgraduates. International directors now give masterclasses, and students work in the Byre, learning how to produce new work from page to stage. And Zinnie has had a profound impact on her students. Anita Ray emerged from the Emlet to win a prize for her first play, Beg, Borrow, Steal. Tim Foley has gone on to become the Channel 4 playwright in residence at the Pentabus Theatre Company. As a colleague whose name really is up in lights in Theatreland, Zinnie has illuminated the profile of the university around the world. The December 2016 production of How to Hold Your Breath in Istanbul provoked much comment in Turkish media about the treatment of women, showing how creative thought can transform social consciousness. In 2017, Zinnie was promoted to professor. In 2018, she became a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. We are so fortunate to have one of the UK's most creative and insightful playwrights in our community. After tonight's lecture, a vote of thanks will be given a little unusually, but given Zinnie's background not inappropriately, by the Dean of Science, Professor Tom Brown, as the Dean of Arts is away. You're then all warmly invited to a drinks reception in Lower College Hall. So now I welcome Zinnie Harris, Zorinthia, the Grecian butterfly, to give her inaugural lecture, The Oresteia, This Restless House, Reframing an Ancient Tragedy for a Contemporary Audience. Please welcome Zinnie Harris.
Before I start speaking, I just want to show you a very short trailer from This Restless House, which I think will introduce the project to you.
Go on then. Avert your gaze. Look away. Don't stare at us for too long. Let me tell you, this tale is not for everyone. The gods have never been happy. There's a cost for this war, and they want you to feel it. It started with a girl, Iphigenia, a worried king, a father. He knew he had to offer something so dear, something so precious. The father took his girl and embraced her. He put his big soldier hands around her back and tighter than he had ever held her before, and he said, "I'm sorry, my love. I did it. I did what you asked. And now can I sail to victory?" Go on then, avert your gaze, look away, don't stare at us for too long. Let me tell you, this tale is not for everyone.
My relationship with the Oresteia started when I went to see Peter Stein's production at the Edinburgh International Festival in 1994. What I knew about Aeschylus' work before taking my seat was probably much the same as any other drama student could tell you. It's an ancient Greek trilogy of plays written by Aeschylus in the 5th century BC and was written to be performed at a festival of plays in Athens, probably on a hillside alongside the work of 2 other playwrights. Like all the plays from ancient Greece, it shows how drama developed from a form closer to storytelling, performed with actors wearing masks and possibly with sections sung. We recognise the Oresteia as a tragedy because it depicts human suffering and invites the audience to respond to the action on stage empathetically and emotionally. I can't remember now whether I had actually read the texts before attending the performance, but I had probably glanced at a synopsis. The first play tells the tale of Agamemnon, king of Argos, returning from the Trojan War victorious, only to be brutally murdered by his wife Clytemnestra on entering their home, in retaliation for his sacrifice of their daughter. The second play picks up this theme of vengeance as their son Orestes kills Clytemnestra to avenge Agamemnon. And the third play shows Orestes chased and hunted by the terrifying Furies, the goddesses of vengeance, who punish crimes against the natural order, in this case, matricide. What I wasn't expecting was to have one of my most formative theatrical experiences. Peter Stein is himself one of the world's leading theatre directors, a true visionary, having made his reputation at the Schaubühne in Berlin. This production was performed on a temporary floor placed directly on top of the ice at the Murrayfield ice rink. We were in this cavernous space where we, the audience, felt tiny, inconsequential against the size and scale of the staging. As a first encounter with the Oresteia, it was both spectacular, rich, theatrical, dark, and deeply absorbing. It had the formality that is there in the original, with the chorus speaking to us in unison, wringing their hands in worry and concern. It had the gore of the murder as Clytemnestra dragged the dead bodies of her husband and his lover to show the crowd. It had the power and the terrorising effect of the Furies as they, dressed in black and almost bird-like, pursued Orestes after his act of butchery. Finally, it had the peaceful calm of resolution as Athena steps in to stop the cycle of blood and revenge and suggests that a jury decide Orestes' fate and transforms the Furies from a power of vengeance to a power of benevolence and blessing. It was one of the most inspiring pieces of theatre I had ever seen. It was also, I recognise now, deeply condemnatory of Clytemnestra and her choices. This was not Stein's interpretation, for it's there in Aeschylus' text, but Stein delivered it with force. She was very much the vixen, the nightmare, the evil female murderer that haunts so much of the collective imagination. The second time I saw the Oresteia was at the National Theatre in 1999. This production was directed by another extraordinary director, Katie Mitchell, equally known for her theatricality, and was adapted by the poet Ted Hughes. The language, as you would expect, was rich and full of imagery, beautiful and compelling. The conceit was that we were at the end of the Balkan War, the chorus were injured soldiers, characters used handheld cameras, and parts of the action were shown on screen, so we had the intimacy that the story needs in moments, alongside the more public and stately. It was anti-war, anti-violence, and also condemnatory of Clytemnestra. She was terrifying and unrepentant, and again merged well with the unconscious fear of the brutal, uncontrollable, and violent woman. When I was asked in 2014 whether I'd be interested in adapting the Oresteia for the National Theatre of Scotland and working with Scotland's leading theatre director, Dominic Hill, I was immediately interested. I'd previously adapted 2 classic stage plays for the stage, firstly Strindberg's Miss Julie, again for the National Theatre of Scotland in 2006, and secondly Ibsen's A Doll's House for the Donmar Warehouse in 2009. So I knew that to produce a successful adaptation, 2 things needed to be in place. Firstly, you need to be in love with the original as a piece of drama, and this with the Oresteia was true. And second, you need to believe that there is something that you can bring. Or to put it another way, and to reference my own title for this lecture, you need to have a good answer to the question, why does an ancient tragedy like the Oresteia, already so brilliant and complex, need reframing? At one level, it doesn't. As I'd already seen with Stein's production, we have this original work which can blaze on any stage. And if the National Theatre of Scotland had simply chosen to produce Aeschylus's Oresteia, no one would have batted an eyelid, and no doubt Dominic Hill would have done an exquisite production. But they didn't. They came to a contemporary playwright, and by doing that, they were asking me, could I work with Aeschylus's material in a way that would deliver the Oresteia to the audience as if it had been written for them now? Could I reframe this work from the past in a way that would interrogate contemporary concerns? I think the Oresteia in particular is ripe for this treatment because it was written with a direct message to the people of Athens at the time. It had political purpose and urgency, namely to promote and present the arguments for democracy and the rule of law as a new way of resolving conflicts to the people of ancient Greece. My first thought about how I could pick up this gauntlet was to respond to the inherited Clytemnestra that Aeschylus and directors like Stein have given us. This is a typical image of Clytemnestra, and it's there in every production. Aeschylus is less concerned with her internal world and more concerned with our sense of foreboding, which he creates masterfully using a chorus who essentially worry us and tell us all is not right. Cassandra adds to the growing fear when she predicts her own death before walking into the palace. The experience for the audience is to watch Clytemnestra with a kind of bated breath. Essentially, it's a drama of will she or won't she? I wanted to question character and intention a little more, particularly the notion of how easy it was for her to kill. If she was a modern character and her husband had murdered their child for a sacrificial act that she thought unnecessary, and she lived in a time when she knew it wouldn't receive justice, would we view her differently? I suppose it was an experiment, and the hypothesis: is there any way that the audience, by understanding her emotional internal life, could actually have sympathy for her actions? We still experience the dread of will she that Aeschylus gives us, but we could also ask, who is she, and why is she, and how could she? I also felt this chimed with a broader question in our cultural lives, namely how women are viewed and understood. Whether it's discussions in the media about how many women are on the FTSE 100 boards, or the Me Too movement, or a fascination with women that do succeed, I felt the representation or misrepresentation or lack of representation of women is very much part of our collective conversation. In theatre, there is a curiosity about why we have so few female playwrights getting work on main stages, and secondly, why there are so few main parts for women. Furthermore, in the classic dramatic canon, where we do have central roles for women, they're often seen in an unsympathetic light and have been constructed to explain an action against a man, or in reference to a man, that labels them either as hysterical, silly, misguided, or intrinsically evil. And, if I reframed the story from Clytemnestra's point of view, could her actions be not of a woman who is going against her gender and becoming unsexed, but because she is a woman? Could the story be used to explore the more human and complicated contradictions of both hating someone and loving them at the same time? And even if we still condemn the murder, can we see it as an understandable, even a heroic act? Here are some facts about Iphigenia's death. Before Agamemnon sets off for Troy, something difficult and unsettling happens. The army are ready to set sail and are all lined up, but every time they set off, the winds blow them back into the harbour. Aeschylus tells us that bitter winds blew down from the Strymon, bringing hunger and delay to that wretched harbour, driving the men to wander on the edge of insanity, wearing thin the cables and rotting the ships. Agamemnon, king and in charge of the army, realises that if they don't leave soon, the war will be lost. And he knows he needs to do something to appease the gods. So he takes his and Clytemnestra's daughter, Iphigenia, and offers her as a sacrifice. Once she is dead, the wind changes and the boats are able to set sail. Problem solved. The gods are appeased. Clytemnestra, however, is of a different opinion. This is an image of Iphigenia's sacrifice from a fresco in Pompeii. You can see Agamemnon to the right and the sorrowful Clytemnestra to the left. Aeschylus, in his Oresteia, gives Clytemnestra the line, "Oh, he had plenty of sheep to choose from, but he sacrificed his own child. My labour of love to charm away the cruel storm winds of Thrace." And after the murder, she says, "I don't care if you praise or blame me. It makes no difference to me. Here lies my husband, dead, the work of this right hand, a just craftsman." And that is the end of that. One of the observations I've made over the years of studying the structural architecture of plays is that we often see a triangle of characters right at the centre. I'll give you an example. You often get two characters in a status quo relationship, maybe a marriage, a sexual relationship, sometimes even a business partnership. And this relationship is stable. It could continue for some time, but there is a tiny fracture line. Something that might have its roots in some difference between them, might cause them some conflict on occasion, but it can be lived with. On the third point of the triangle is a character who very often comes in from outside and either brings an attitude or a set of demands that is tailor-made to work on that fracture line. Their presence alone makes the dynamic between the original couple untenable, and the three characters start a struggle where the third character cannot coexist with the original couple as they currently stand. Something needs to change for the situation to regain stability. You see this most clearly in Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire. Stella and Stanley are in a status quo relationship, a marriage. They rub along fine despite their differences, which are mainly due to class. However, Stella's sister Blanche arrives at the door, and the issue of class can no longer be ignored. She is demanding, and with airs and graces looks down on Stanley, and a power struggle for Stella's attention and provision ensues. Blanche, living in the house, cannot coexist with Stella and Stanley as they were before, and Stanley makes sure that it is Blanche that goes. You see it again in Arthur Miller's The Crucible. We meet Goody Proctor and John Proctor as they're trying to heal from Proctor's affair. And if they'd been left to their own devices, they would have managed, probably, with this small piece of grit. However, Abigail's presence and her actions means that it becomes more than grit. It becomes something they have to face. These triangles act like motors for the drama. They're the internal structural framework from which the action is hung. If I were to introduce the ingredient of love to the boiling point that is Clytemnestra's inner life, I thought, it would not only allow a harder journey to murder for Clytemnestra, but it would give me a dramatic triangle. The very idea of the daughter can't coexist with any future relationship with the husband. They're incompatible. She could kill him then, not because she hates him, but because she can't reconcile the fact she loves him with her love for her daughter. But in order to achieve this, I had to bring the ghost of the little girl on stage and let her fully inhabit the third point of the triangle. It also gave me a new understanding of why Aeschylus has Clytemnestra killing him in the bath, killing Agamemnon in the bath. Rather than it being an example of her depravity to kill him when he is vulnerable, I saw it as a dramatization of the lover part of their relationship. She kills him when he is naked, just like he killed the product of their naked life together. It suddenly made sense to me. Of course that's where she would do it. That's where she's hurting the most. Here is my Clytemnestra, much more broken and human, and near drunk when the play begins, who hears that Agamemnon is coming home and is haunted by her daughter. This little girl ghost who was murdered and needs her mum to do something about it. Clytemnestra in this scene tells her, "I don't know what you want from me. Do I look like someone who can do it? I'm weak, forceless, feeble. I could lock the doors, never see him again. Wouldn't that be enough?" The creation of the ghost of the little girl also opened up a further interesting avenue for me. One of my wrestling points was what to do with the chorus. Aeschylus, of course, is writing when drama is just emerging, and the chorus is halfway between storytellers and participants. They're both commenting on and affected by the action, but they have little agency of their own. Many of the recent versions of the Oresteia have cut the chorus entirely and dramatised the story using the main characters only. I felt to do that was missing an opportunity, and to some degree to duck the challenge. But I did want to give the chorus agency and dramatic purpose. Here the ghost started to help me. I remember my sister, when she was little, liked to pack suitcases for people if they went away. She would get out a little bag and fill it with her toys. If I was to dramatise Iphigenia's ghost, I needed to think about what it was like for her in the last moments of her life. Her dad was going away to war. She was probably worried about that, and maybe she might pack a bag full of things that would help him. In my version, the ghost of the little girl starts the play by opening her suitcase and telling her dad what she's put in it for him. Burdock for brutality, she says, a little well-pressed and made into a poultice, and bilberry for bludgery, foxgloves for fearlessness, garlic for endurance, crushed up and eaten raw, mistletoe to lose all gentle spirit, willow to feel unabashed, brazen, comfrey to feel no pain. That last encounter with her father would have been the same moment that he killed her. So we could have her ghost enacting out her last moments on earth, and the chorus could be the people up the hill who see the ghost every night. What was interesting about approaching this first scene like this was that I started to create a scene that in form, and I'm not talking about quality here, resembled the opening scene to Hamlet. A ghost and a series of watchers. A ghost that is demanding action. And I suppose that started to guide me. Hamlet, of course, is a very good reference for all of the Oresteia. But when you dramatise fully what Aeschylus gives you, and you start to drag the offstage moments onto stage, you get something that has the muscularity of event and twists and turns of Shakespeare and his contemporaries. I'm not making a grandiose claim here. The credit for all of this is with Aeschylus and the intricacies of the source story. But it's interesting that there is a dramaturgical link, given that both the Elizabethan and ancient Greek era are known for their great tragedies. With Iphigenia as an externalised creation, and one that Clytemnestra is forced to confront, I needed some space to explore the opposing emotional force, one of attraction and love for Agamemnon. In the original, we don't have any time with them alone, as he arrives already in front of a crowd. So I created a middle act, a continuous scene where Clytemnestra and Agamemnon would meet up a hill outside the city, away from the crowds, and before his ceremonial arrival the next day, alone. What she sees is a man who comes in full of sorrow and remorse about their daughter. He looks haggard and downtrodden, and plausibly like a man who has suffered and is still suffering. "Do you think I wanted to kill her?" is almost his first line. "I had to do it, and every day for the past 10 years I've wished it was different. Every arrow on the battlefield that I took for her," etc. But Iphigenia's ghost is always present, as that third point of the triangle, hovering around Clytemnestra and never far from her thoughts, exactly as your dead child would be if you came face to face with her killer. Despite this, Clytemnestra starts to soften. She says to him, "I would only have to half close my mind and look at you, broken and desperate. I could take you in my arms. You loved her. Yes, I can see that now." And moments later in the same scene, "I missed you. I missed you a lot. Not as much as I missed her, but 2 deaths I felt that day." He takes her hand. He says to her, "We had something strong once, didn't we? We didn't imagine it." She replies, "Of course we didn't." He kisses her. She goes on, "I found it so hard to hate you. It drove me mad." He kisses her again and says, "Don't then." Clytemnestra won over, they start to embrace. As they talk further, and with his arms around her, Clytemnestra asks him, idly, "What's that?" she says. "Around your wrist." Agamemnon looks. "This? Just a keepsake. Nothing. Someone gave it to me." Clytemnestra, "Someone gave it to you? Ah, who?" Agamemnon, "I forget now. One of the men." "The men made that?" And then he answers, "A woman then." She stands back. "A woman. I see." And he admits that he's come home with a slave woman called Cassandra, a princess of Troy, who was taken by the Greeks when Troy was sacked. He has come to Clytemnestra full of remorse, talking about 10 years in hell, but somehow he's had time to be sleeping with his slave. All the ground they have made up is lost in an instant. The ghost stands up, The scales are starting to tip in her direction. "You were 10 years punished by your own thoughts," Clytemnestra says to her husband. 10 years in your own prison, a kind of hell, you called it. And he has little answer for her, other than that they will have to rebuild slowly. When he leaves, it looks like Clytemnestra has seen through him and will now do what the ghost asks. But I didn't think we'd earned that iconic image just yet. She turns to the ghost instead and says, "Leave me, ghost. Let me make up my own mind. Easy for beetles, they have their poison already in their soul, but I am not a poisonous creature." The final step in the transition is brought about when Cassandra herself comes on. Cassandra is looking for herbs and for supper, and she comes on with some scissors. Cassandra is an extremely interesting mythological construct that deserves a whole lecture to herself. But briefly, she's been blinded by Apollo and has the gift of being able to see the future, but combined with the curse that she will never be believed. Here you see her with the queen in my version. She doesn't recognise Clytemnestra and unwittingly reveals that she put the ribbon around Agamemnon's wrist to keep him safe from the evil of his wife. At that point, any faith Clytemnestra had in Agamemnon goes. She realises that everything he said to her was designed to appease her and was not the truth. Cassandra realises she is face to face with the woman who will kill her and starts to shout for help. Before long, they're fighting. Clytemnestra takes the scissors and cuts out Cassandra's tongue. She looks down at herself. She now has Cassandra's blood on her hands. She's crossed a line. She looks back to the ghost and says, "Hurdles I thought I had to cross, crossed now, it seems. There was doubt in me, but now, come then, spirit, climb on my back. If I am to do it, I need you on my back." And here we see the first sighting of the Clytemnestra that Aeschylus gives us. Those of you that know the original will have spotted that so far I've made little reference to Aegisthus. In the original, Aegisthus is Clytemnestra's lover, and they together plot to kill Agamemnon. Clytemnestra, for reasons I've laid out, and Aegisthus for a different set of reasons to do with an old family feud, and the fact that Agamemnon's father served up a meal of Aegisthus's siblings to his father. It's a gruesome part of the tale, but the function on this story is threefold, all of which I felt were not useful to me dramaturgically. Firstly, it paints Clytemnestra in a bad light. She, like Agamemnon, is already with another, and whilst it could still allow the complexity of love to be explored, it suggests that she's moved on in some way from Agamemnon. Secondly, it reduces her agency, as she and Aegisthus conspire together. And thirdly, it brings in a second justification for the murder, which has little to do with anything we've seen, almost as if Aeschylus is saying, even if you don't agree with Clytemnestra's point of view, here is another grievance which had to be served. Additionally, it's dramatically unsatisfying to bring a character into the last scene of a play and reveal this was actually what it was all about. All in all, I felt Aegisthus's role and function in the original muddled the clean lines I was trying to draw. However, Aegisthus is necessary for the second play, so that left me with a little conundrum. I needed to set up that they're in this together by the time we get to Orestea's murder of his mother, and I didn't feel that bringing him in as a lover in part 2 would quite work. So he has a role in my part 1. Just at the very end, he arrives as a suitor of Clytemnestra's, someone who very much is hanging around and egging her on, but not someone who takes away any of her power. His first line is, "So you did it." She replies, "You didn't think I would." And he answers her, "And it's properly done." The final theme that I wanted to explore in the first play, and across the trilogy as a whole, was the notion of faith and belief in the gods. Clytemnestra was my way into the first play, but the question of what motivates our actions and what we believe is the right way to respond is the backbone of the whole trilogy. Aeschylus shows this with the futility of the ancient law of the Furies that mandates blood must be paid for with blood. In his part 1, the chorus say, "Blame is met with blame. It's so hard to decide between them. The plunderer plundered, the killer killed. But while Zeus sits on the throne, the wrongdoer suffers. That is the sacred law. Can the progeny of this curse be cast from the house, or is this family welded to its own destruction? In the third play, Aeschylus speaks to his audience directly about resolving conflicts with justice and more reasoned decision-making. I didn't feel that selling the idea of democracy to the people of Scotland had any conceptual weight, that most of a contemporary theatre-going audience is pretty signed up to the idea, but that we are, and particularly then in 2014, are living through the consequences of conviction bias, by which I mean you believe that something is right because you want it to be. You see patterns of meaning where there are none, whether in statistics or science or day-to-day life. Belief and faith are a big part of this, and in a modern world where religion can still be a motivating force for violence, I felt that challenging the sense in this was sufficiently allied to Aeschylus's theme and yet had contemporary relevance. To do this, I needed to keep the idea of the gods within the plays, but to use them slightly differently. Rather than having a whole raft of different gods that you can appeal to, and who might even contradict each other, I wanted to talk about any belief where meaning is placed in anything external and supernatural and used to justify action. I also knew to explore this I would need at least one character to change in relationship to the gods, to believe one thing, then believe another. Change, of course, is the stock in trade of a contemporary writer, but not something that Aeschylus and his contemporaries were able to achieve so easily. The way his play was conceived and laid out was that an actor put on a character mask, and that character played their hand from start to finish. But I can achieve sudden change in the modern theatre and bring it about at moments where characters feel most certain of their actions. What if Clytemnestra, rather than remaining triumphant as she stands over Agamemnon's body, quickly begins to doubt herself? Here is the mechanics of how I brought that about. At the beginning of the play, she hates the notion of the gods, as it was in their name that Agamemnon took Iphigenia's life. Here, Agamemnon is walking across the purple cloths that she puts down before him, condemning him to admit a sort of vanity. After all, the cloths are reserved for the gods. She is showing how thin his belief structure is. He will do, and did, anything to appease the gods. But here he is breaking the rules that they have set down. It's the final test, if you like, and one that he fails. She says, as she's wielding the knife, You walked on the cloths, you sacrilegious pile of shit. Your beliefs are paper thin, and yet when it came to killing your own babe, for what? A war? Another piece of vanity. There is a final twist for Clytemnestra, though, and it involves the slave girl Cassandra. Moments before the murder, Cassandra has predicted her death at Clytemnestra's hands because it was her fate. She stood on the steps of the palace and told the crowd that she would be murdered here. Clytemnestra, a denier of fate, says, You will not die by my hand, I promise it, here in front of witnesses. Old men, by which she means the chorus, watch this. I am the master of my own actions, and I say she will not die. The murder of Agamemnon is brutal and botched, however. Clytemnestra stabs and wounds him first in the bath, but he overpowers her and runs outside, where they continue their fight to the death. In the flailing around with knives, Cassandra is injured. Clytemnestra goes from her triumphant moment of standing over Agamemnon, the iconic image that I discussed at the start, to suddenly noticing this slave girl bleeding into the ground. All her certainty in her own position is located now in this woman staying alive. Here you see her with the dead Cassandra's body. I've already described that Aeschylus is here in this moment. You can see him at the back there. His line, So you did it. Her line, You didn't think I would. And it's properly done, he asks. The king is done, if that is proper. Well done, he says. She answers, Not well done at all. Look at this, another victim. A slave. I shouldn't have killed her. I was not supposed to kill her. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps the gods, after all. Oh, hell, the rain. Did you feel it? Look at the sky. Clytemnestra's certainty of her own position starts to crack as the rain falls heavily from above, and she wonders if there might be gods after all. I'm now going to show you another trailer of the first play, in which you will see all the iconic moments of you will see the iconic moment of Clytemnestra over the bodies, but here it's transient and a fleeting moment alongside a range of other emotions which more fully dramatise a wife and mother on a journey towards murder. The second play, The Libation Bearers, gave me less to work with. The majority of the play is made up of of discussion between the chorus and the characters about what is right and wrong. As a piece of theatre, there are only two moments that stand out. One is at Agamemnon's grave, where Electra, now older, is making a libation to her father's ghost. Here she meets Orestes, her brother, and the scene is essentially one of recognition, then discussion how Orestes has no choice but to avenge their father as Apollo has ordained it. The second moment is the murder itself, where he stabs Clytemnestra. Other than that, the dramatic shape and movement across the play is thin. Orestes pretty much tells us what he has to do, then goes on and does it. Again, it's the chorus of libation bearers that create the drama with their sense of foreboding and their moral questioning of whether Orestes and Electra are right and wrong. In Aeschylus' original, Electra and Orestes hate their mother. The second play is essentially is one of, will they be able to kill her? Is it the right thing to do? And will the gods help them and stay on their side? There were three structural things that I felt I needed to achieve to deliver the second play to a modern audience. The first was to re-orchestrate the murder so that it was harder and again came at a personal, emotional cost for the murderer, fully dramatising the question of whether it was justified and giving the play more dramatic shape whilst working within the existing image structure. The second was to take out Apollo and make the demand directly come from the ghost. The third was to keep working with the female line. This I felt was particularly important, partly because this is very much my interest in theatre, putting female characters and stories centre stage and allowing us to revisit ancient canonical characters in light of contemporary psychological understanding. Also, it would make a nonsense of the work I'd done with Clytemnestra on part one if I abandoned this line of thought here in favour of Orestes. Additionally, I found it dramaturgically odd that Orestes, a character who has little, if any, mention of or presence in the first play, comes in from outside to avenge his mother's death. Electra is there already, in the palace and at the scene of her father's murder. Surely she should be our new hero. Thematically, my aim was to continue to explore familial relationships in light of understanding of psychology and attachment, as I had done in part one, but this time focus on parent-child separation. In the second play, I wanted Electra to separate from her mother in the most dramatic way possible, and to see her undergo reversal and change, basically from loving her mother at the start and wanting no harm to come to her, to hating and killing her at the end. Where I saw that Aeschylus had been brilliant, though, is showing the purpose of libation, that you pour oil and wine onto the grave of a ghost who has reason to be restless. You see Electra doing this here with the ghost of her father behind her. It's central to the play and useful to me, but I gave it a theatrical boost. I wanted the demand for revenge to come from the ghost directly rather than Apollo, and for us to see a visible external manifestation of that demand. Orestes at first, and later Electra, could be compelled to action by the ghost of the father in a way that we can see. What could the ghost do to them, I wondered, that would mean they couldn't ignore his demands? Here, I remembered something. Once, a few years ago, I was with someone when they had an allergic reaction to a medicine. It produced this all-over body itching that was so awful they were prepared to pour boiling water over their skin to stop the itching. I saw quickly, until medical help was sought, how insane being acutely itchy can render someone, and I thought this might be a useful manifestation of the restlessness and call to action from a ghost. When Electra meets Orestes at the graveside in my version, he's already tormented. Again, you can see the ghost of Agamemnon looming behind. Orestes tells us, "Just an itch at first, here on my feet. Everyone gets itches. I scratched it a bit, thought nothing of it. Then the other foot. Good grief, that's itchy. Keeps me awake a bit, keeps me awake a lot. I hardly sleep now because of the itches. Then behind the ears, it started as well. On my back, you have no idea how much it itches." What we learn is that Agamemnon himself was always itchy and is haunting his son by sending this curse of hives. Orestes says to his sister, "I am turning into him, Electra. There is no other explanation. This is not something that can be soothed by wine or libation. The ghost knows it falls to me. It falls to me, Electra. The ghost cannot avenge itself, so it falls to me." You see here a new triangle. Electra's view of her mother is that Clytemnestra is good, not self-serving, but the epitome of a good mother, and doesn't deserve to die, as she killed their father out of love for their sister. It's a view that is incompatible with Orestes' position. "I won't hurt her," says Electra. "Of course not," he replies, "but the ghost won't stop until we do." During my research, I spent some time with a good friend of mine, a Freudian analyst and child psychiatrist. I think he's here tonight. And we talked about many family relationships, but in particular how a child comes to separate from their parents as they approach adulthood. He talked about this moment that should happen in a healthy separation, where the child buries the notion of the idealized other. In fact, this can happen in any separation. But to separate from a mother, one has to start to see them as they are, rather than as we want them to be. This is the basis of an adult relationship with one's parents. And this was what I needed to dramatize, the exact moment where the scales fell from Electra's eyes. Aeschylus in the original creates a test for Clytemnestra. Orestes wants to see how Clytemnestra will react when she's told falsely that he is dead. The playwright is using it to put dramatic pressure on Orestes at the moment when he gets out the knife. Clytemnestra passes the test and shows maternal love, and it's then harder for him to kill her. Whilst this is not a bad dramatic construct, it renders the internal resistance to killing her momentary, and it didn't offer me enough space to chart a psychological journey across the play. I felt if I turned it around, so Clytemnestra, rather than passing the test, fails, I could use it here to create the turning point for Electra. But this required Clytemnestra to be having a hard time of her own, which again had seeds in the original. After all, she sent libation to Agamemnon's grave. I needed to go further, though. She needs to rejoice in Orestes' death. How can I bring her to that point? Well, Aeschylus tells us that she has a dream that she's interpreted as that Orestes will kill her. If she has the fear of certain death, combined with thinking that the gods are against her, the belief change after Cassandra's death I set up in part 1, then she would have good cause to celebrate Orestes not being alive. It required that I took her quite far out of rational to achieve this, though. So the paranoia that started at the end of the first play takes hold, and she is deteriorating mentally, believing that she is damned. This is externalized and dramatized by her seeing flies everywhere, believing they can smell her death and are waiting to feed on her rotten flesh. Here you see her asking a palace slave to slice the flies' eggs from her skin. Here, Electra has just told her mother that Orestes is dead. Everything is now focused on Clytemnestra's reaction. At first, it seems to go well. Clytemnestra stands up. She feels dizzy. "Oh, goodness," she says. "Oh, gods, Electra asks her, "Are you okay?" She replies, "My Orestes, my only boy, this can't be. My little one, could you bring me some water? There's been so much death in this house." She goes on, "The gods will forgive me. I have been so frightened. Yes, I know I am damned, but to be killed by your own son." Phew, Electra thinks. My image of her is intact. But minutes later, Clytemnestra seems to recover. The windows that she's kept shut to keep the flies out, she asks to be opened. And the smell that was her own death, she says, that's the most surprising thing. The smell has gone. Open the windows, let the outside in. Bring me something to celebrate. Electra can't believe it and asks, you must be sad, though, your son. Clytemnestra replies, yes, it is sad, but he was young. He'd never done anything bad in his life. The gods will look on him favourably, whereas if I were to have died, I would have been damned. She laughs. The seer got it wrong. I'm not going to die. She kisses Electra. I think we should celebrate that, shouldn't we? With a drink. Bring a fucking drink. Let's have a party. Clytemnestra leaves grabbing a bottle. Shocked, Electra turns to Orestes. The illusion has been shattered. Separation has occurred, and the ghost will be appeased. In the final moments of the second play, Orestes and Electra stand over the corpses of their mother and Aegisthus. In order to take Electra forward into the third play rather than Orestes, I had to have Orestes not be able to see the murder through in the end, and Electra to deliver the final wound. Aeschylus deliberately gives us an image that is repetitive of the image at the end of the first play, a murderer and two corpses, and then quickly taking away the triumph with the arrival of the Furies. Here I repeated the trick. The terrible itching that had sent them both demented stops. They experience physical peace. The ghost of Agamemnon is appeased, and their job is done, or so they think. However, as the play closes, Electra starts to shake. Yet another curse has been sent by the Furies. The third play was the hardest to adapt. There were useful and challenging things about the original offering. On the one hand, Aeschylus brings the Furies onto stage, this incredible theatrical spectacle of bile and rage who chase Orestes, a gift surely to any playwright. But he also resolves the Furies by referring back to the gods. It is Athena who steps in and solves the whole cycle by suggesting a new way of dealing with revenge. I didn't think that bringing in Athena was an option, really. To a modern audience, it would feel like a cop-out and not something that speaks to our world. The Furies interested me, though. Whether or not this was Aeschylus's intention, I felt there's an interesting externalization of the internal here. Electra has killed her mother and now is in torment. In a modern context, if we were to see someone being chased by the Furies running down Market Street, we would probably understand it to be psychosis of one form or another, particularly if we knew they'd killed their mother, and any help would be medical and psychological, not supernatural. I wondered if I could use this play to suggest that psychological calming can be brought by understanding and self-forgiveness. I started playing around with the idea that part 3 would take place in a psychiatric hospital, where Electra has been sent as her torment is seen as madness. She has been the most distressed patient that they've ever had and has defied all attempts to cure her. However, a young psychiatrist, Audrey, has had some experiences that echo Electra's, and they go on a therapeutic journey together. This also allowed me to bring in a third female character, a more modern woman, who subliminally brings the trilogy closer to the audience. Orestes, in the original, begs Apollo, then Athena, for deliverance from the Furies. But rather than just forgiving him, which is surely an Athena's gift, she grants his request in the form of a trial. This is where Aeschylus lays out a proper litigation system and a move away from the emotional retaliation that we have seen so far. Orestes and the Furies put their case in turn, and a jury of 12 independent men decide whether he is innocent or guilty. Suddenly, the situation has a degree of fairness to it, and decisions are made in a reasoned way. There's a bit of misogyny in the preamble to the trial in the original, though. Aeschylus suggests that the murder of a father is worse than the murder of a mother, because, in Apollo's words, the one named mother is not the child's true parent, but the nurturer of the newly grown seed. Man mounts to create life, whereas woman is a stranger fostering a stranger. Luckily, as the play is long out of copyright, I ignored this and gave Aeschylus the benefit of the doubt as having lived in a long time before the genetics of reproduction was properly understood. What would my end comment to the audience be, though? How could I finish these stories of revenge and justice and healing without bringing in a god? I will admit I was stumped for a while. I felt it was important to keep the existing image structure of the play, in this case Electra's trial, which additionally answered my desire to give the chorus more agency, for they became the serving jury, and the audience understand that the performance of the play that they've just witnessed has been the giving of evidence. When the chorus's votes are counted, though, they're even, just like Aeschylus gives us. The question of Electra's guilt has not been resolved. It's an awkward moment in my play. The chorus turned to the audience. The story has no end then. There is no moral, no conclusion. This restless house will stay stirring and vengeful. Get your money back on your way out? Was Electra guilty? Who knows? This was a little like me being stuck for the solution and the end note to the trilogy. However, the answer to both the vote and to the final beat of the trilogy came from something I remembered I frequently say to my students, and that is that the end of a play can often be found in the beginning. A little girl comes in. "Excuse me," she says. This is my equivalent of Athena. The gods in my trilogy, after all, are the ghosts, and Iphigenia started the whole story. Surely she could draw it to a conclusion and take the final vote. But what would she say? If she said the same as Athena, then Electra would be innocent. I felt that would deny the complexity that I had been so carefully laying out over 3 plays and nearly 5.5 hours of stage time. It's not about guilt, it's about understanding surely. And after all, Electra is guilty of murder. We have seen it. The question is, can she be forgiven by herself or by others? The little girl sits down and opens her suitcase. She refuses to vote. But surely she has an opinion, they plead with her. After all, she incited Clytemnestra to violence in the first play. No, she says. I did nothing. If you thought I did, it was because you wanted to think that. I was a little girl. I wanted to play with my dolls. The little girl then takes out her suitcase, which we first saw at the start, but instead of the burdock for brutality and bilberry for bludgery that was imagined, it turns out it's full of toys and gifts for her warring family. She says again, the living drive the living, not the dead. Spirits, ghosts, demons, we've gone. No lasting impression, no power to change. Can I play now? The healing that Electra so desperately needs comes when the little girl talks about the Furies and says to her sister, they're only scary if you run from them. If you ask them in, they sit down like friends. There's nothing to fear. Finally, she does give us her vote. She has drawn her family into a game and laid out a tea set. Here, her last words are a note of caution. My vote is for an end. It's to stop. I was just a little girl. Everything else was you. Thank you.
Principal, ladies and gentlemen, wow, how do you follow that? It now falls to me to propose a vote of thanks to Professor Harris. Professor Harris, thank you for this stunning lecture and the insights you've brought to us, showing how your skills can bring new life and voices, particularly to the female characters from 2,500 years ago. If tonight were an ancient Greek play, then the principal can be said to have provided the prologue. Professor Harris has delivered the episodes where the characters have been brought to life, and I'm here to deliver the Exodus, where, and I quote, the chorus exits singing a processional song which usually offers words of wisdom related to the actions and outcomes of the play. You'll be glad to hear, no doubt, I'm not going to sing. I'm sure you'll all agree with me that this lecture has been a tour de force and has shown the real depth and love Professor Harris has for drama, and importantly the process from the initial conception to delivering a really significant piece of theatre to the most important stages in the country. I'm certain you'll all wish to join with me in thanking Professor Harris for providing her unique insights into how the Oresteia, one of the most significant pieces of drama in the canon, which continues to echo through our culture today, from spaghetti westerns via Watership Down, even to Harry Potter, yes, it's there as well, can be made exciting and relevant to the times in which we live, and in particular how the focus on female characters who have been, if I dare to say it, somewhat stereotyped previously, can be given new, strong voices. If the chorus in today's world were represented by our media, then perhaps it's fitting that I leave the final words to them. As Professor Harris has been far too reticent to tell you, This Restless House received amazing reviews following its performance in the Citizen in Glasgow and at the Edinburgh International Festival. And the Scotsman says things far more eloquently than I ever could. The text of this new version, though, is a complete and spectacular rewriting of the original, which frames the events in a world both contemporary and timeless, and achieves a major shift away from the patriarchal perspective of the original. And now, a key part of my role in the Exodus is to invite all of you to join us for a reception in Lower College Hall, where our own libation bearers have been busy, although hopefully this time without the involvement of the Furies. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me once again in thanking Professor Zinnie Harris for tonight's truly spectacular and powerful lecture.